Okay, so funny story. Last month, I was trying to film a video about what I read in May. However, it was so hot. In the beginning of June, it was so hot that the camera just gave up and it could not record. It didn't keep most of my footage. So I think between the daylight and the fans and the lights, it was just not working. So I took a rage induced hiatus, and now I'm back to talk about May and June. New plan. I'm filming it on my phone because I know my phone isn't going to die on me. Fingers crossed. I'm filming it at night, which is why everything looks different. Also, I tried filming it on the back camera of my phone, so I'm not tempted to look at myself on the screen, because if I look at myself, I'm not looking at the actual lens, and that doesn't look good. So this is a bit of a learning curve, and it is temporary, but if you want to know what I read in May and June, this is what is necessary. Additionally, it is still hot. Hello, I live in a hot climate with no air conditioning, so the window is open, and it's still the weekend, it's Sunday, so there are a lot of clowns out there making noise, and I can't help that. So if you hear any clowning outside, bear with me. I don't want them to be there either. So, we're going to start with May. I read 3 novels in May. We're going to start with the novels. I think I'm going to start with a positive note so I don't speak so negatively right off the bat because I already have an attitude. So we're going to start with what is going to be one of my favorite books of the year, and that is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the second book in the Poppy War series. So I'm going to try and tread lightly with spoilers, but unfortunately I'm going to have to touch briefly. So if you want absolutely no information about what this book is, skip this part. However, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there was a war and the Poppy War, right? If you hear that, that's the tram going by. So I don't think it's a spoiler that there is a republic in a book called The Dragon Republic. So after the war that's in the Poppy War, they're trying to build a republic in the Dragon Republic. It's about figuring out a new regime on the scorched earth of the old one, overthrowing an empress, trying to build an army. It's very sort of at first it's very grassroots military, if you can say that, and I like the scrappiness of this. Additionally, I like the way it zoomed out of the situation, because before it's a war between these two countries and you're not really sure what else is going on in the globe, but then as you zoom out you see that there's more going on, and there's more religions, and there's even more languages. So if the first book in this series is about, it's sort of a loose allegory inspired by China and Japan and their relationship, this book is more about China's relationship with the West. And once again, it is absolutely brilliant. She fits what could easily be 3 books into 1 book, even though it's quite long. I had a little bit of a issue with the Poppy War in that it sagged in the middle, but this is page turner, front to back. It's very political, yet it's also really eventful and exciting. There's a lot of new characters introduced, so this is a good time while also having a really big think. And I love to think while I'm having a good time. For me, thinking is a good time. So this is political intrigue and military combined, is what I would say. And whereas most second books in a series feel like connective tissue between the setup and the conclusion, this really feels like it can stand on its own. I mean, obviously you have to read the first book, but this really does feel like an achievement in its own right. And I think it's the best in the series, because in June I read the 3rd one, which I'll talk about later. Oh, you can see my little dragon stuffed animal. Dragon and Dragon Republic? Can you believe that? She's gonna sit over there. Another novel I read in May was something called The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was a whodunit mystery thriller that I read with my mom. In April, I made a video just recommending a bunch of books to her, so you can watch that if you want. So that was on this list, and because we have a lot of bad luck reading books that we end up hating, that I did a lot of research, and you know what? The first book we picked from this list, we hated. I think my mom was a little bit more tolerant, but I loathed this experience, and so I'm going to be a bit of a bitch now, but stay with me. I feel that this thing was completely mismarketed, mishandled, poorly written, if I wanted to go that far and like blame even step one in the process. It's pitched as a whodunit, which is, hey, there's a wedding ceremony on a remote island off the coast of Ireland. Somebody dies, everyone's a suspect. That sounds like a blast. However, nobody died in this book until, according to my Kindle, like 90% of the way through. That is not a whodunit, that's more of a who's it done to, which is not what I signed up for. It does not sound fun at all, predicting who's going to be murdered in this thing, because I hate all of them, first and foremost. Every single character sucked. They're all like feckless little creatures that have no introspection and no interest. They're all boring, they're all annoying. And so you get a bunch of different first-person perspectives from all these awful characters, which is a terrible time. You're waiting for a murder that happens way late. Then you're not even given any time to solve the murder because it's solved for you like a chapter later. So this was really like, what was the point of the whole thing? Someone explained to me why this was successful and why this author is making more books, because that actually blows my mind. And I was just pissed like the whole time. So, and we agreed this is going to be the last time we read from this author. And I really hope, okay, in my script, I said, a little behind the scenes for my script, I said, I will not be reading any more Lucy Foley, and I hope to God this is the only dud on the mystery thriller reading list, or I'm going to bang my head so hard against the wall that I'll become illiterate. Which is a bit much, but that's kind of who I am as a person. Not to spoil the rest of the video, but we did read something else from this list, and I will be ending this video with banging my head against the wall. The third novel I read in May was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is something I didn't even realize was a novel until I finished it. I really thought it was like a creative kind of poetic memoir, but it is absolutely fiction. But I think he weaves in a bit of like his own life into it too, so the lines are blurred, which I can appreciate. The pitch is a man writing an open letter to his illiterate mother, which I am hooked right away. Like, writing a letter to someone who can't read, there's this really vulnerable quality to it. It's about the immigrant experience, about identity, it's about sexuality, it's about sort of finding your place. It's a little bit about substance abuse as well, and it's kind of packed to the brim with a lot of sensitive, interesting, well-handled subjects. And because it's written by a poet, that's how he got started. This writer is a poet. It does have this really lyrical, very flowery, really kind of dense writing, which I can appreciate. I did some highlighting. I don't know if you can see. Ooh, I'm seeing it on screen, and you can't really register most of the highlighting I did, but it's in there, trust me. And there were some great sentences that I liked in this. However, I did find it to be trying a bit hard, doing a bit much. God, everyone is walking down this street, but we persist. We're persisting. So this book has kind of a stream of consciousness writing, and I pulled a quote here. I'm not telling you a story so much as a shipwreck, the pieces floating finally legible. And I think that really explains it really well, like a long poem, truth bubbling to the surface. However, I'm glad I read it. It was cool. I liked it. But it's just been on everyone's best of list since it came out in 2019. And I just was like, found it a pleasant couple of hours reading it. And that's kind of all. So I could see myself returning to it and feeling differently. So we'll see. That was that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a memoir. This is called How to Save Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. I think one of the greatest treasures that literature has to offer us is being able to see the world through different perspectives and understanding people and culture and places you might have never otherwise heard of, investigated, or understood. For example, quick, name something about Jamaica. name anything about Jamaica. First thing that pops out of your head when you think about Jamaica. Rastafarianism is probably what most people will think of. Now, quick, name one thing about Rastafarianism. Just one. And if you say Bob Marley, you were right with me before I read this book. I really had no clue about the religion, about the culture, really about the entire nation. I just kind of had a vague idea about. So as it turns out, less than 1% of the Jamaican population is Rastafarian, and they're actually like a persecuted minority, and people lose their jobs for practicing this religion. So that's just one of the things I learned from this memoir about a young girl growing up Rasta, and I can't tell when to use Rasta or when to use Rastafarian. I will use them interchangeably, but if I'm using it wrong, please let me know. Sorry. So she grew up Rasta, and it was a really puritanical, patriarchal system that she grew up in, because the father is kind of seen as God, as like head of the household, maker of the rules. So each Rastafarian household is sort of its own unique little capsule with its own rules and regulations, and hers was really isolating. Her and her sisters not allowed to go outside. Meanwhile, her brother, free to go wherever he wanted. Isn't that the way things go? However, she was able to escape sort of these generational hardships and this place she was stuck in through an education. Luckily, she was able to educate herself, get an education. A similar title to this is Educated by Tara Westover, but that deals more with Christian fundamentalism. Waiting for the siren. I found this really moving and really compelling, especially with the way it was written, because Sophia Sinclair also got started as a poet, and poetry is the thing that lifted her out of the situation. Is her life raft, the thing that she clung to sort of get out of her situation and to become who she is. And so therefore the writing is really poetic and lyrical. However, it also acts as like a historical document, the story of a family, the story of an island, of a people, of a culture, of a religion. And so I found it equal parts intimate and informative. And I don't know if you can spoil the end of a memoir because it is a person's life, but I guess maybe slight spoiler for the end of it is that this book ends with a bridge that it ends with forgiveness and a desire to reconnect with the ones that hurt you in order to provide a better environment for the next generation. And I found that really uplifting. Anyway, so this ended up on my favorite books of all time and of the year after I read this, and I definitely would recommend it to everyone. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the nonfiction that I read in May. I'm going to get a little bit political, but I'm a political person, so work with me. In April, the United States Naval Academy removed 381 books from its shelves by order of the Defense Secretary. These are books that directly talk about sexuality, gender, and race. For example, they threw out a book that discussed the female victims of the Holocaust and their perspectives and experiences. However, there are still 2 copies of Mein Kampf on the shelves at the US Naval Academy. So this really isn't about sensitivity, this is about the controlling of information. And for many Americans, an armed forces library is the only way they get books. This is important for military families, it's important for the people who are in these academies, because one, they're citizens, they grow up to become, adult voters who need to be informed. Many of the people in armed forces academies go on to become politicians, so when we're hiding important information from people, that is insane to me, because you have to remember, where they ban books, they will eventually burn books, and where they burn books, they will eventually burn people. And that sounds crazy, and I sound like I've got my tinfoil hat on, but the worst and least productive thing that you can say is, it can't happen here, because it can. And you can't say, it can't happen here, if you've also said, history repeats itself. Those 2 phrases are sisters, and I just think we need to start taking book banning more seriously, because we can't let it happen. Anyway, I'm really so frustrated, especially now that I live abroad and that I feel, well, I mean, nobody's really in control. This whole thing is a runaway train. But I feel the least I can do is be educated on the experiences of my fellow Americans and to read the books that the government doesn't want me to read, because those are the books that everyone should be reading, investigating, exploring, borrowing, protecting. So I made a long list of books that were banned from the Naval Academy, and I am reading them. So the first book I decided to read on this list is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This book was widely circulated during the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd, so it's widely considered to be sort of one of the main entry points into the contemporary discussion about race. And this re-energizes the conversation by first introducing some intersectionality, talking about how racism intersects with color, class, sexuality, power, survival. Additionally, it talks about how we can identify certain policies and the racism that exists in our existing system. And, for example, just as you can solve a murder and find a murderer and find clues and see who did it, you can, when a poor black child dies in Mississippi, you can do the work and do investigation to find out what policies are responsible for certain atrocities, and it's about holding the government accountable for the policies that actively hurt people and are harmful. And if you think that this book is a real bummer, I guess, if you can say that, I would find that it's really more empowering the reader about tools you can use to educate yourself to become a better citizen, and it's about challenging ourselves. Here, I've got an actual quote. It is best to challenge ourselves by dragging ourselves before people who challenge us with their brilliance and constructive criticism. And that's what I think about this book. I think it's constructive criticism. I think it's pretty brilliant, actually. And it talks about how racism is kind of a metastatic cancer, but it is curable. It can be both terminal and curable. I think this could be essential reading for young people. It hurts me that this would be taken off shelves. It's not the best thing I've ever read about race, but I do find it was a helpful tool to navigate this big old crazy world. I talked a lot about this one. I'm going to try and keep it brief for the next two. The next two nonfiction books I read in May were not banned by the U.S. Naval Academy. I'm not sure if they're on the shelves. I'm just letting you know I'm pivoting. So the first one I want to talk about is Madness, Race and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum by Antonia Hilton. The Jim Crow Asylum in question is the Crownsville Hospital outside of Annapolis, Maryland. The author is writing about the history of the institutions, the patients, and the staff, and how they represent the larger issue of the 20th century asylum. And I think it's a great way to learn about injustice when you sort of go small scale and you can put faces and names to widespread injustices. The contents of the book are what you would expect. It's real sad. People are unjustly detained with no reason, crime or diagnosis. Some people fall asleep drunk on the street and wake up in Crownsville. The conditions are bad. The hospital was built by the patients, who, of course, were not paid for their labor. The black staff were treated poorly. Racism and racist policies dictate the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people. I really admired the research that the writer did here. The author inserts themselves the perfect amount into the narrative when discussing actually meeting the people, both staff and patients, who were at this institution. And I think that's the most shocking thing, is that the people who lived through this are still alive, and that when you really think about it, the history of the United States, it's about 3 lifetimes long. It's about 3 people long. And that is not a lot of time. And that you think that things belong in history books, but really, they're walking on the street, they're sitting next to you in church, they're sitting next to you at the restaurant. History is all around, and I think it's important to talk to people and read about their experience. And so I found this a valuable read. I thought it was really good, if a bit emotionally dense and repetitive towards the end. However, I found it a nice resource. The next book I want to talk about is called Master Slave Husband Wife by Elon Wu. This is a nonfiction book about an enslaved couple's journey to freedom in 1848. They travel from Mason, Georgia, all the way up to Boston, Massachusetts, then eventually to Canada, and then eventually to England. And how they made the initial stretch, Macon to Boston, was the woman was really light-skinned, so she disguised herself as a disabled white man, and then was accompanied by her husband, who pretended to be her slave. And that was the scheme, and it was successful. And then they went on to become peers of Frederick Douglass. They became abolitionists, activists, public speakers, and their activism continued throughout their life. And so this is the story not just of their escape, but of their entire life and journey in their life's work. The most touching part of this journey for me is the fact that they would have been stronger apart, that she could have disguised herself as a white woman and kind of slipped away unnoticed and really wouldn't have been hassled, and he could have taken to the forest and gone on foot and been able to move faster, and that they were actively weaker together, but yet they would rather be together than apart. I found that really moving, that you could really see their love for each other in the book. Okay, now this is where things get tricky, because yes, it's important to read these kinds of stories, it's important to read these kinds of books. However, books are products that are marketed to consumers and make certain promises. So when you name your book Master Slave Husband Wife and market it as an escape, a reader, me, is expecting certain things. And honestly, the escape story of it was over a quarter, maybe a third of the way through, and then it was about activism after that, which is like fine if it's a textbook and you're trying to learn the whole story, but when you bought it to learn about the escape, and the escape is only the first third, and yes, it's kind of heart-pounding. However, the reason they made it is because nothing went wrong. So the first third is about an escape where nothing goes wrong, which, thank God, hello, first of all. But I think they was just using a lot of like narrative techniques that align with a novel, that align with fiction, so it kind of makes your brain think you're reading fiction and you anticipate that kind of pacing. So, you go a third of the way into the book and then it just drops off with any kind of tension or pacing or suspense or anticipation. That was like a little disorienting. So that's my thoughts on the book. I would still recommend it, but like get it from the library probably would be my recommendation. Anyway, woo, we did it. That's everything I read in May. So now we're going to switch to talking about June. I think I'm going to go in maybe chronological order now. We're really kind of freestyling here. The first book I read in June was this wonderful gift, I Dream of Joni, this is a portrait of Joni Mitchell in 53 snapshots by Henry Alford. It's addressed to me. I go to this poetry night once a month, and sometimes I arrive visibly sad, and so they because I'm having a hard time right now, so this was a nice little gift from them, which I really appreciate and I love and cherish. And I love Joni Mitchell. She's my girl, that's kind of my whole thing. So it really sucks that this book was really poorly written. Oh no! It's like, honestly, I really laughed out loud on like page 5. Had to close the book and like readjust my expectations. Because what you have to do is just like march through it and try and glean as much anecdotal information, some stories I haven't heard before, and ignore how bad it's written. And it is written, so deeply bad that I can't even really explain it to you. Oh yeah, he used the word yikes and oof, like oof, O-O-F. Like, that, you don't have to write that. You don't have to write that down. Or, right. Page 3, Chapter 1. He says, even though Mitchell is someone who judges her work on artistic rather than commercial terms, it can't be lost on how spectacularly well her last 3 albums have gone. Let me mansplain for you. And then I elevated. And then I elevated out of my body. Mansplain. You wrote the word mansplain in a book about Joni Mitchell, and no editor put a hit out on you? And you're still walking the streets safe and sound, not fearing for your life? That is insane to me, and it just gets worse. I mean, that's just like a funny hee-haw, but there are so many absolutely terrible sentences in this that I'm like rattled to my bones. Additionally, and I want to be gentle, because Joni is like the best to have ever done it, and I don't want to gatekeep the best. Everyone should listen to her. But why is it that men keep writing about Joni Mitchell when they don't know a damn thing? Respectfully. In Mr. Alfred's case, disrespectfully. Because I read some interesting things about Joni Mitchell that have been written by men, but there are just some things that, like, how can you hear the lyric, sometimes I want to settle down and raise a child up with somebody, but then it passes like the summer, I'm a wild seed again, let the wind carry me. What is Henry Alford getting out of that lyric? Nothing, probably, because there's some actual interesting things that happen in this that he just passes right by and does not take time to like dissect, analyze, appreciate. For instance, like the way she was treated in the music industry, the things that have happened in her personal life, the general, being a woman walking through the world, especially in the 60s and 70s. I mean, even now, but like, especially in the 60s and 70s, the things that people just openly felt was okay to say to her, especially music journalists. So it just felt like just some slop by a guy who fundamentally doesn't understand Joni and who fundamentally does not understand the written word. And that's my review of it. But I still cherish it as a gift. She's real cute on the cover and the back. And it's, they wrote a nice note to me. But I don't recommend. And if I see this man on the street, it's on site. It's on site. Okay, let's change the subject. We're gonna talk about some graphic memoirs, which is one of my favorite like subgenres. Graphic novel meets memoir. It's in the name. And because it was Pride Month in June, I wanted to read some like queer-oriented ones. So I started with The Times I Knew I Was Gay by Eleanor Cruz. I found this one was quite surface level, but it was adapted from a zine, so I get it. And honestly, this one didn't execute its title very well. I'm very big about did you execute what you promised me, because it was basically a straightforward linear memoir and not really a numbered list. Because the last like couple of chapters, so the last couple of reasons, were talking about her like first same-sex relationship. So you knew you were gay because you were in a gay relationship. Like, really rethink the title, because if 3 chapters about why you knew you were gay is because you were dating a woman, then like it's not fitting. I'm not getting it. But although it was not groundbreaking, I still thought it was fast. It was cute. I liked the art style. I could find this being a nice resource for somebody trying to find themselves. So I don't think it's like a total lost cause. I just thought it was rather plain. Okay, then I wanted to read about like gender queerness and like the gender non-binary, because that's kind of a blind spot in my knowledge. Because you kind of hear more about like, I knew I was gay because I saw Jessica Rabbit on screen and felt something. But like understanding that you live somewhere in between man and woman, you just don't hear about those epiphanies as often, so I just wanted to read about them. So I read Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which was banned by the US Naval Academy. That's why I wanted to read it. And then I also read Homebody by Theo Parrish. Genderqueer was excellently written, in my opinion. I think one of the best of the month. Really great insights. The author uses like an unconventional set of pronouns, so that was interesting to read about. I really liked the art style. Homebody was intended for like young adult readers, so probably high school readers, and I felt that that was a bit more surface level and repetitive, but it made sense if that's like your first time reading it. I can also imagine it being a good resource for people like figuring out their brains when they're like 17, 18. And so that's my Pride Month graphic memoir wrap up. I think genderqueer is the general recommendation here. I really, really liked it, and I still think about it. A regular memoir I read this month, Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. That was the highlight of my month, was reading this. The author is a Black woman from Mississippi, and she writes about the 5 Black men in her life that all died within a 4-year time period in her life, and one of them being her brother. And so she talks about each of these men and how they kind of fit into and expose the systematic problems in America and how they make life as a Black man more difficult, and how Black men are vulnerable to things like gang violence, substance abuse, lack of mental health resources, injustice. And she also talked about her own family history, and her brother died first in this list of men, but she couldn't talk about or write about him first. It was just too much, so she talked about the men in reverse order and then talked about her life chronologically. So it went back and forth, sort of the timelines meeting in the middle. Does that make sense? Have you ever seen Memento? A bit like that, but less confusing. And this was really beautifully written. She's primarily a novelist, so she understands narrative and how to use storytelling techniques to her advantage. So this really, there was never a dull moment. I was really moved in the end. I cried like a baby. I mean, really, I had to be held. I'm kind of sensitive to little brother stuff, so that's probably an impact. But I think if you have a human heart that is beating, you'll cry at the end of this. And I felt like I learned a lot. It was, I just like, sometimes I walk down the street and I remember it still. And I really, really enjoyed this one. And a really great, accessible way to like learn about the world around you. And that's my thoughts on Men We Reaped, because I don't want to cry again. Okay, we're going to switch to novels now, and we're going to talk about Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This is sort of part thriller, part family drama, but it leans a lot on family drama, actually. It's a book about 2 sisters. One is an active addiction in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. If you aren't familiar with Philadelphia, Kensington is like ground zero for the opioid epidemic. It's really a drug war zone down there. It's really frightful. And the other sister is a cop who patrols Kensington. And the book is about sort of how they got to both of these destinations. And that is told through flashbacks, but in present time, and this is where the thriller part comes in, is that one of the sisters, the one in active addiction, is missing, and there's a serial strangler on the loose, so we're trying to like catch him, find her, and learn about these 2 women. It's definitely, I think I would confidently call it not a thriller. I don't think it's twisty-turny enough to be one. For me, it's definitely family drama with darker elements. I'm pretty aware of like the opioid crisis, and like the psychology of dysfunctional families. So for me, this didn't have very many surprises. It all kind of played out exactly as I thought it would. There were a couple parts actually where I like gasped, which I can appreciate. But it was well written. I did enjoy it. And I think I'll definitely read more from Liz Moore. I think I'll maybe read something that I know less about, and that could be helpful. I would recommend it for people looking for like a character-driven, thriller-adjacent story. The next thing I read, this is a novella, short, absurdist novel that reads a lot like a Twilight Zone episode, and it is called A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. The concept of this is that the main character is sent to hell because, as it turns out, the one true religion is one that nobody's ever heard of. Like 600 people follow it, and all of us, we've been wrong this whole time. Which is objectively hilarious. And so in this religion, Hell is a library. Not for me, babe. For me, that's heaven. Except the twist is, it's full of every book that's ever been written and every book that could be written. For example, there's a book with just A's, a book with just B's. There's a book it's Huck Finn, and the whole thing is Huck Finn, except Jim is changed to Tom. And like that's the only change in the book. I mean, so infinite number of books, essentially, and this infinite library. And to get out of hell, you have to find the story of your life that has no typos and is accurate. So obviously, this is like basically impossible. But everybody's gonna give it a shot anyway. We're following this dude, the people he interacts with. Honestly, this was deeply unsettling to me. Definitely Twilight Zone. It wasn't like graphic or scary, but I'm just made really uncomfortable by the concept of infinity or eternity. Like for me, I've never been comforted by the idea of heaven, eternal life. Pass. That sounds really scary. So I had like a really bad time reading this actually. It's not a bad book. It's a good book. It has kind of like a Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams kind of humor to the writing. I just could have lived without it, and I should have looked internally and known that I can't read about eternity or I'm gonna freak out. So luckily it was only like 100 pages, and I had a giggle from time to time. Because I am looking for like Twilight Zone-ish books. But yeah, that was that one. Okay, it's the moment you've been waiting for. I read another book with my mom and we hated it. Once again. I'm this close to the edge. I'm so hot, so I'm gonna power through the dump truck that is outside, which is fitting because we hated this book. The only one left by Riley Sager. And it can go outside with the dump truck that's outside right now, I'll tell you what. Actually, I think I am gonna wait because it is really loud. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, the garbage man is gone. Now we can talk about our real garbage, which is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Okay, I don't want to be... Actually, I take it back. I am gonna be hard on this book, even though the first third was promising. The first third, it was interesting. This is about a caretaker goes to take care of an old lady who everybody thinks murdered her whole family like 50 years ago, which is an interesting concept. It does kind of feel like a Goosebumps episode, like go mow the lawn at Old Man Jenkins' house. There's something about it that I find endearing, but the second third of it like completely stalled out. We're set up a few questions, but then none of the questions are answered. I just feel like in a thriller you should be constantly asking and answering questions rather than hold the same questions for 300, 400 pages. And then the final third was batshit crazy. It ran the story completely off the rails in baffling ways and just made the whole experience futile. Because remember I was saying we've been holding on to these same questions as like, did she do it? If not, who? Etc., etc. And then it just kind of throws out all these questions by turning the whole thing on its head, which isn't fun. It's annoying. I don't mind a little high camp, a spectacular, bizarre ending. I don't mind that. If done appropriately, like that's chill. However, it was stupid, frankly. And just what added to like the unnerving quality of it was the writer not being able to write female characters, and that became more and more obvious as the book goes on. To really expound on this, I'd have to spoil things, which I would happily do if I see you in person, but like online I'll keep it spoiler free, even though I am urging everyone that if America's banning books, why don't we ban this one? Because I just can't believe that he keeps getting away with it. Because from what I understand, this is his thing, is to promise a lot and deliver very little. This is my first Riley Sager. I won't be reading anymore, I'll tell you. It's just like, I'm tired of having a devastating disappointment trying to read a book with my mom. I'm just trying to have a blast. I'm just trying to have a silly, goofy time where we try and guess the murderer, and we just keep falling flat, and that sucks. So I think if we're craving a whodunit, we're gonna go right to the source and read some Agatha Christie, but I think right now we're gonna pivot to like a different subgenre of like speculative fiction. We might like go into horror or something like that, because I can't be reading any more of these mystery thrillers. I really can't. Okay. We're gonna talk about an Italian classic next. This is The Leopard by... Do you see me contemplate in my brain if I wanted to do an Italian accent? I've decided no. It's by Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa, and that's how I'm going to pronounce his name, because if I try any harder than that, I will sound foolish. Great cover. I mean, look at that. Excellent little tiger. This is my second time trying to read this. It's because it is like an important Italian classic. Like, this is the Italian classic. Everybody reads it in school in Italy. I think to this day, it is the book that has the most copies sold. It's the most widely read. It's like there To Kill a Mockingbird, maybe. And there's a movie that I want to see. It has Claudia Cardinale and Alain Delon, and I want to watch that movie, but I wanted to read the book first. And so with my second attempt, I finally finished it. And people really herald this as a masterpiece. But they must be reading a different book. They gotta be reading something else, because I found this to be incredibly dry. Hold on, I just realized I left the fan on, and hopefully that's not creating like weird white noise, but I'm gonna turn it off to make sure that, you know, there's no weird noises happening, even though that's kind of a lost cause because the window's open, but I'm gonna try my best. I guess that's also a test of like, can I have the fan on and film at the same time? So we're gonna see what that audio sounds like. So bear with me. Where were we? I liked learning about the history. This is about Italian unification, specifically like 1860 is when Italy became Italy, because before it was a bunch of like little kingdoms, and then it's all been consolidated, including Sicily. And Sicily, a complicated place. It's Italy, but it's also kind of not Italy. And so this is sort of about changing times, and it most reminded me of Gone with the Wind, actually, only in the sense that it's sort of the crumbling of a world and a social structure, and that people then become anachronistic, where the system that they grew up in and the future they were promised kind of disappears. I'm thinking specifically about like Ashley Wilkes and how he was like a southern gentleman, and then after the war he tills the fields, which, like, good, you know, he's a slave owner, till the fields, goddammit. But like this did have that kind of same vibe of like, our world is completely changing, now what? However, I probably could have learned that with a Wikipedia article or documentary, because this, it was really dense, and it is translated, so maybe I can blame some of it on the translation. I just found that it was kind of dry, nothing happened, and it was very masculine. It was very dude bro. This is written in the 50s, I think. Whatever the 1950s upper crust Italian version of being a dude bro is, like, that had that kind of vibe, if I'm making any sense at all. So essentially, I'm gonna watch the movie, and I'm gonna hope that it's more engaging. At the very least, Alain Delon and Claudia Cardinale are gonna be nice to look at. But hey, this book is good to look at. I'm gonna keep it because it's real pretty, and I bought it in Italy. So that's my review of that. Now, folks, we've reached our last book of the video, and we're gonna end where we began. That is with The Burning God, which is the third and final book in the Poppy War series. And I'm going to talk about this incredibly briefly, because I can kind of allude to stuff in the second book, but I think at this point I really can't say much without just spoiling. So you can, I don't know, stop the video here maybe if you don't want to hear like anything at all. I'm going to keep it really brief and vague though, so don't worry. So if you're stopping here, like and subscribe, obviously, please. But if I'm gonna briefly discuss this, I'm gonna say that I like it the least, but it isn't bad. It's just so battle heavy and so war heavy, obviously. But it does feel really repetitive with like the constant battling, the constant blood, plight and deprivation, that like it's just becoming a bit much. And I'm not really a battle kind of girl. I'm more of like conversations in smoky rooms is kind of my vibe, but not like heroicism on the battlefield. So this was kind of testing my limits in terms of that. However, the main character of this is at peak crazy, peak insane, peak psycho, which I appreciate because I like a female character who is a little psycho. I like a gal with gumption, and she is the most insane I think I've ever seen a character ever. Okay, to better explain what I mean, it's like, do you remember in the Hunger Games, in the third installment in the Mockingjay, a spoiler for that, if you care, where they're voting if they want to implement the Hunger Games again, but for the children of the Capitol, and Katniss is so filled with rage and grief that she votes yes to killing children of the Capitol. That sort of anguish and violence motivated by rage and grief is kind of this character's whole thing. I am really pleased to have read this whole series. It has been a real blast, and it has converted me to a fantasy fan, and I am going to seek out more fantasy. I loved reading a series. This is, if we're excluding the Anne of Green Gables series, this is like the first series I've read since I was 14 or 15. Like, there was something about it that just brought out this like teenage part of me that I really enjoy, like falling in love with characters, watching them grow, watching the world get crazy. Even though the last book was a little tough to get through, I think I would still give the series like an A+. Okay, so at last, we reached the end. I have no idea how long this video is, but thank you for staying with me. I'm glad I did it. I did kind of miss doing it when I wasn't doing it. I'm still kind of figuring out if I like this whole idea of talking to a camera and editing it and uploading it. But anyway, I hate outros, so cool. Bye. Okay, bye.